All right, everybody, we're back today with the Q&A. So let's get on to it.
How and where to pick posing trunks. So I have no experience with that. I've never actually competed yet. However, I know the way that it works in the US, as I think you're in France, if I'm remembering correctly, is that there are businesses that essentially just specialize in this. So they have like everything for men and women, all the accessories that are needed for your on-stage appearance. And, I'm sure that on the websites, it simply has instructions for sizing. And most likely there is a support person that you can, or a salesperson that you can either email back and forth with, or even call on the phone to get any further help if you need it. So I would look for something similar in your country, or maybe look at some like bodybuilding groups on Facebook or something and see if anybody has more information for you. Unfortunately, I wouldn't even know where to start to look for something like that in France in particular. Any personal training certificates that you would recommend? I've never gotten one before, so I would just get the one that your gym wants you to get so that you can work at the gym. Otherwise, the info is all useless in all of them. If you have a longer torso, are you allowed to pull your posing trunks up to hide that a bit? There's no way for them to kind of enforce that anyway. I guess if you were giving yourself too much of a fucking wedgie, maybe somebody would tell you to adjust your posing trunks. But yeah, there's nothing specifically that's going, even if it's not allowed, no one's going to actually stop you from doing that. I know people that have done something similar to hide stretch marks or loose skin. That said, I would not worry about that, man. You're not being judged on your torso proportions. So don't get in your head on that one. What do you think about Avi Silverberg breaking the Alberta women's bench record? Is this a trans athlete thing? I honestly have no idea. So somebody breaks an obscure record and then everyone's upset because a man broke a woman's record. Is that basically the situation? Honestly, I don't really care. And I think people get so hysterical about this when the reality is people have way bigger genetic advantages than that in the first place in sports. I think a lot of people like to pretend that trans issues in sports has something to do with fairness, but nobody gives a fuck about fairness in sports. Fairness in sports is the biggest joke I've ever heard. There's some people that are born 7 feet tall. Should they have their own separate league because it's just unfair for all the short people? Well, that's a natural advantage. Okay, well, what about rich kids versus poor kids that had access to coaching from a very young age? Well, they earned that. I mean, whatever. You don't care about sports. This is a political thing. People get upset because it's just triggering to them emotionally that it's a man competing against women. Okay, do you have actual data that shows the effect size of the advantage? Do you have actual data that shows how big of an advantage a transitioned person is getting? No, it's just hysterical, right? There's women that naturally have 20 times the testosterone of other women. Caster Semenya, for example, who actually won Olympic medals. Do you want to hormone test every single woman in every single sport to make sure that they have a fair amount of testosterone? No, you don't want to do that either. Again, it's just the trans hysteria. I mean, there's not going to be a rash of men transitioning to women to beat sports records. That's not worth it. The cost is too tremendous financially, spiritually, physically. Nobody is going to do that just to beat a sports record. We're talking about less than 1% of the population to begin with, and a fraction of a percentage of the active athletes participating in sports. From there, the percentage of trans athletes that are actually going to win anything and break records is so infinitesimally small that this is essentially a non-issue. The vast majority of trans athletes are just wanting to be allowed to participate. Stakes are so low in most instances that I think it's a net positive that they're included. Do you think influencers are overrated with the content that they put out? Well, I'm an influencer, bro. Am I overrated? Am I good? Tell me I'm good. I think like anything else, it's, there's good ones and bad ones. You can't really paint with a brushstroke that broad. With 10 rep high bar squats, I sometimes get forearm cramps. How can I fix this? Use wrist wraps, and instead of trying to hold your wrist straight and squeezing the bar really hard, use the wrist wraps to support your wrist and grab the bar with a bent wrist, allowing the wrist wraps to absorb some of the weight. That should prevent you from getting any forearm activation whatsoever. That unintentional drop set, though. Not a question. Wanted to thank you for all the answers. You help us a lot. Cheers. Cheers to you, buddy. Thanks for asking questions, everyone. If you ever do want to help me out, just pick any one of my posts that you like and share it to your story. That actually helps a lot in the algorithm for whatever reason. Is sciatica considered a major injury, or is it something that you can train / plan around? Both. I mean, I've had clients that have had sciatica before, but it does need to be planned around. It does need to be trained around, and you're going to have a lot more auto-regulatory elements in case somebody is dealing with a flare-up on any given day. So, both. Do pronated pull-ups train the upper back or the lats? Oh my God. Both. End of question. No. Okay, guys. In both rows and pull-ups, forget pronated pull-ups. Both rows and pull-ups, you train the lats and the upper back. However, which muscle group gets trained the hardest is going to be the one that movement biases. Are you seeing any scenario where somebody is doing an overhand pull-up where the movement is going to be limited by scapular retraction? Not unless they're doing some kind of chest to like high stomach area, chest to bar pull-up. Almost all pull-ups and pull-downs are limited by the lats and teres. Are lengthened biased movements more fatiguing than short biased movements? So when I say lengthened biased versus short biased, I'm talking about the strength curve. So if I say that something is short biased, that means that it's going to be hardest at like lockout when the muscle is fully contracted. If I say lengthened biased, that means that the movement is going to be hardest in the stretch position. However, we have to differentiate the strength curve bias from what position the exercise is training. For example, I could do a leg extension with a lengthened bias, which would mean that the leg extension is the hardest at the bottom. However, there's no version of leg extensions that fully stretches the quads, and as such, no leg extension really trains the lengthened position. On the other hand, I could be doing something like, let's say, a pendulum squat, and that is going to get the quads in their fully lengthened position with maximal knee flexion and a stretch on the quads, but it's going to be the hardest through the mid-range. It'll have a mid-range bias, not a lengthened bias. So things that train the lengthened position are harder to recover from. What is the best exercise for blocky abs? So when it comes to muscle, you can't ever change the shape of a muscle. All you can do is make it bigger or smaller. And the abs are just like every other muscle. If you want your abs to get bigger, pick an ab exercise that is easy to progressively overload and progressively overload the shit out of it and get as strong as you can on that exercise. One exercise that just about everybody will have access to will be some sort of full range of motion sit-up, especially like on a GHR bench or on a decline. Those are great, very easy to load with bar, dumbbell, or plates behind or in front of your head. Can daily undulating periodization be used effectively for hypertrophy? Not really, man, because here's the thing. When you're talking about using daily undulating periodization for something like powerlifting, it's because you need to specify in certain movements to be good at them. So you can get your hypertrophy work from your squat while doing your strength work on your squat and your power work on your squat, all because you mostly care about how you perform on the squat. That's not the case in hypertrophy. You're going to have different movements that are best suited to certain rep ranges. For example, leg extensions. What would be the point of using DUP there? You really want to do sets of 5 on leg extension? In reality, leg extensions are almost always going to work best between like 10 to 30 reps, if not even more, like 15 to 30 reps. Likewise, let's say you're doing barbell squats. You're really going to do barbell squats over 15 reps, that usually becomes limited by your lower back and by your cardio. So it makes a lot more sense for hypertrophy training to get in work in different rep ranges by simply using the movements that are best suited for those rep ranges rather than doing the same movement in every single rep range, because most movements have a rep range that's going to maximize their SFR, and there's really just no advantage in rotating through them like you would for powerlifting purposes, because you don't have to only do one movement for hypertrophy. You can do them all. Does your body normalize to the amount of food that you have to eat, or do you always have to keep gaining more to gain more weight? The amount of food that you're going to have to eat is always going to go up over time. Maybe not in a linear relationship with your body weight, but if you gain significant weight, the amount of food you have to eat will go up significantly as well. And in my experience, as well as the experience of many other enhanced athletes, this relationship becomes less and less linear the bigger you get. In order to make the jump from 220 to 230, I had to eat proportionally less food than I did going from 240 to 250, and proportionally less still than when I was going from 260 to 270. I almost couldn't get it down at that point. So Mark Bell might have been able to get away with eating 4,000 to 5,000 calories at 330 pounds, maybe because he was sedentary, maybe because he has genetically a slow metabolism, who knows? But the amount of food that you eat is the amount of food that you have to eat, and it's different for everybody. I wouldn't say that you can look forward to someday having to eat less in order to keep going up. It pretty much keeps going up over time. Sorry, man. Does posing practice increase your mind-muscle connection and your ability to hone in on a certain muscle and flex it? I mean, yes. Pretty much that's the whole answer. Yes, it does. The more you practice your posing, the more you'll be able to connect with certain muscles and flex them on command. How long can a break be during a set if you slip out of the seat or you lose your grip and you need to readjust? Honestly, if you take more than 2 to 3 breaths, you're doing mini sets at that point. I mean, even if you take 3 breaths, I would argue you're doing a mini set at that point. So the answer is really none, but I wouldn't worry about it that much because this isn't going to be something that happens to you every single week or every single time you do this movement. So just make a note in your logbook. I slipped in the middle of the set and it led to a little break. And next time, your performance will be corrected without that slippage and you'll have a better number to track going forward. Have you used the hammer strength pull down machine where the seat faces the load? You mean the hammer wide grip pull down? Yeah, I've used it. Do you like seated concentration curls off the leg? I mean, they're just fine, man. The thing for me is a concentration curl, depending on how you have it set up, is exactly the same thing as a spider curl or a preacher curl, except you can only do one arm at a time. So if you have access to a preacher curl bench, you can just use it the opposite direction to do spider curls, and now you can do both arms at the same time, and it's also more stable and sturdy than your leg. Is there any particular reason you chose not to lengthen bias your RDL? When you're using the hammer strength lunge machine to do RDLs, if you put all the weight into the lengthen bias peg, it tends to mostly train your hamstrings. And if you put it mostly on the bottom peg, which picks up maximum resistance around knee height, you'll feel it a lot more in your glutes. When I'm doing a hip hinge, I'm training hip extension. I want glutes and hamstrings, so that's why I loaded it evenly. Lyle McDonald versus Mike Israetel in the following 3 things. BJJ, fat loss diet, and RIR training versus failure training. Well, Lyle doesn't actually espouse failure training, right? His argument was that I guess Mike wasn't really training that close to failure and that the studies done on failure training can't be good. Because who can do 50 sets of leg press to failure in the same session? And that's a very good point, Lyle. That is a very good point. But if we're talking about fat loss dieting, like one of them actually sticking to one, Mike is a bodybuilder. He's done competition diets for shows. So that's pretty easy. And then as far as BJJ, I mean, come on. Mike Israetel is a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. I don't think Lyle's ever done jiu-jitsu. So yeah, Mike's winning that one pretty easily. Do you like 4x25 accessory warm-ups for powerlifting? No. I do whatever mobility drills I need to do, and then I just go over to the bar and start loading weight. Anything else is a waste. Hammer strength versus Atlantis, assuming you've tried both. Well, man, they both make like 50 different pieces of equipment, so which piece are you talking about? In general, I would say that Atlantis makes better equipment than hammer strength, but it will come down to the specific piece that we're talking about. Are 5x5 programs suited well for strength and size gains for beginners? Yes, absolutely. And nobody wants to hear this, but it just doesn't really matter what you do as a beginner as long as it is structured. The only problem with some of the 3x5 and 5x5 programs for beginners is that the people who made them were extremely dogmatic. No curls, no rows, no lateral raises. Like, if you're a beginner that cares mostly about looking good naked or looking good on the beach, you're going to want some isolations in there even right from the very beginning. My question about my Maddie friend wasn't about his legs. It was about training 6 times per week for the upper body. Isn't that too much? Well, it could be 3 back sessions and 3 push sessions, so not necessarily. He could be doing chest, shoulders, triceps. Frequency doesn't tell us anything by itself. You have to understand that some people actually start out with the mission of training as frequently as possible as one of their main goals versus to make the most amount of progress possible. So you can very easily train 7 days a week and make progress if you manipulate every variable to make it manageable, right? I even personally could probably train my quads 3 times a week if I did in a heavy, light, medium style where one of the sessions wasn't that hard. Maybe I just did 2 sets of leg extensions. And then on another session, I did a couple sets of leg press. And then on another session, I did a couple sets of hack squat. So you can force things to work, even if it's not for the best rate of progress, just because you prefer that setup logistically. And again, many people that train 7 days a week have it as a primary goal that they want a high training frequency. They don't like off days. So they make their training work for 7 days rather than doing the best training and finding how many days it is.
All right, everybody, that's it. If you like the video, like the video. Questions and comments below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Do something today to look at a cute dog. You should definitely do that. And then have a good rest of your day.